All right, welcome back to the channel, guys. This is a video that I've been wanting to do for a while now, and I finally just sat down and found the time to do it. And it is essentially going to be my personal top 10 list of the most problematic cards in Edison format. So I've been playing the format for around a year now, maybe a little over a year. I think I started around January 2022. And that was around RBET 1, I think, maybe RBET 2. But I started around that time. Yeah, definitely RBET 1. I started paying attention to the format around that time, and I've gotten the chance to play it a lot and just kind of come up with what I feel like are the cards that are pretty annoying to play against. So let me preface this by saying this isn't necessarily based on the most popular deck or the most popular cards that people are playing in a format. It's specifically on cards that I find to be absurdly annoying to see when you're facing someone. So if you see anything on this list that you feel like, well, how often does that actually come up? Even though I do think that everything in this top 10, I feel like if you just play Edison format for even one day, you're going to come across multiple of these cards. At least you should, unless your area is just absolutely trash or you're running into the most random of randoms on DB. But I feel like my top 10 is very valid. So let's just get right into number 10. And this is going to go in ascending order. So it'll start from number 10 and obviously go to number 1. Number 1 being what I consider to be the most problematic. And then, number 10 being the least problematic. And I think number 10 is very situational. So let's just get into it. All right. Cold Wave. This card, honestly, it doesn't see that much play because not many decks can run it, right? So that's a good thing though, because it's really obnoxious that there's no real counterplay to Cold Wave. It's Solemn Judgment or bust. Like there isn't really much else you can do when this card gets activated on you. Whereas I almost wanted to include Heavy Storm, but then Heavy Storm not being in a format actually warps it a lot. If you look at 2011, pretty much a lot of 2011 is without Heavy Storm, and it's heavy traps. People set 4 and 5 turn 1 often, and you're playing a very different game. It's still old Yu-Gi-Oh, but it's a very different game when Heavy Storm's not in the format. So I think Heavy Storm is a necessary evil in Edison format. But what isn't necessary is fucking Cold Wave. Like this card literally just invalidates so many of your spells and traps, and it cuts off things. Like if you do have oppression, it cuts it off. It you can't activate or set any new ones once they pass their turn. So the decks that play Cold Wave, let's start with that. It's usually degenerate shit like Lightsworn and Norlaris. Sometimes you have like Glad Beast will play it. And all of those decks, what they do is they Cold Wave you and then they literally wipe out your entire field and they put you in a position where on the following turn, you're not going to be able to defend yourself. And they have some ridiculous monster like Judgment Dragon or Heraclinos or Gyzaris. Or a tagged out Gyzaris, which is a bunch of Glad Beasts that threatens to do it again on the next turn. They just get Bestiari at any point or Prisma. And it doesn't feel good. Like when you get Cold Waved, you could have 3 back rows set, Bottomless, Wing Blast, Book of Moon, and you have to hold that. Like it's just going to resolve and wipe out all of your cards if your opponent's hand is set a certain way. Black Rose Dragon usually follows a Cold Wave. And it's just annoying to play against because it's also a one of, and this is kind of, a lot of the cards on this list are actually at 1. And that's part of the reason why some of them are on the list is because they're really annoying that you can't build your deck with one-ofs in mind, in my opinion. I think it's foolish to try to build your deck to be like, I don't want to get Cold Waved, so let me play Dark Bribe in my deck. Like, that's ridiculous, right? Like, that is absolutely crazy. Whereas Heavy Storm, for example, we play cards like Starlight Road in Edison format. Everyone plays Solemn pretty much, depending on your deck, but most decks play Solemn Judgment. And there's counterplay to Heavy Storm. Like there's things you can summon Stardust Dragon, you can have Starlight Road, and that stuff. And you can also not set a lot of back row, especially once you see Heavy Storm in the graveyard. You're free to do so, but Cold Wave is a card that you really can't account for unless you know that like that kind of deck will be playing it. And you outside of having Solid, there's nothing you can do about it. So that really sucks. And most decks don't play Dark Rob, so I'm not going to use that as like, oh, well, you could have, like, that's not real. Most decks don't play that card, so it's just obnoxious when it gets activated because you know something really degenerate is about to happen to you. Like, oftentimes, it's Cold Wave into Rescue Cat, which is also pretty ignorant, Summoner Monk and that type of thing, usually JD or Gyzaris, Prismatest Tiger, stuff like that. So Cold Wave is number 10. It's the least problematic, I would say, on this list, but it is very annoying to go against this card and have it activated on you is usually going to be game breaking. And yeah. Okay. Next is Royal Oppression. Now I know Royal Oppression has fallen out of popularity. Like it's definitely decreased in popularity from when I first started playing Edison format, where it was an auto include in like every single Blackwing deck and some other decks as well. I see a lot of people taking it out of their decks. I'm not really sure why. Like I get that it's not good against Blackwings, but it is good against a lot of the decks in the format. And I feel like, in my opinion, it's still very much an auto win kind of card. I don't know what experiences other people are having, but Oppression, it might not literally win you the game that turn because you activated it, but it'll put you in such a position that the game is skewed so far in your favor because your opponent just tried to special summon an Evil Hero Inferno Prodigy or Junk Synchron or Miracle Fusion or Return from Different Dimension or Synchro for Brionac or whatever. Like so many of the decks obviously special summon, right? That's just a part of Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially in Edison format where synchroing is a big deal. To a degree, fusion summoning is a big deal, contacting and Miracle Fusion, stuff like that. But there's a lot of special summoning that goes on in the format. And while this isn't necessarily a good card against Blackwings, for example, it is good against a lot, like Quick Draw. This card is very good against Quick Draw, which people do play. It's good against Glad Bees. People play that deck as well, even though, in my personal opinion, I think that they probably shouldn't be, but that's neither here nor there. And there's like the new frog decks are also susceptible to oppression because they now, so instead of just being like a old Monarch deck that just Substitoad was like their main special summon, and Treeborn, we won't even bring it up really because obviously you can't actually oppression it. But now they play a lot of special summons. So the modern frog decks are playing Miracle Fusion, they're playing Substitoad, of course. They're playing Junk Synchron and Battle Faders. And most of the cards I just named are at 3 in their deck. That's a good chunk of the deck that can get oppressioned. And I've oppressioned frogs, and it really has hurt them. Like, it can be absolutely devastating when their play is contingent on, I need the special summon. Like, if I'm attacking, I play Blackwings a lot. I'm a Blackwing player at heart. It's one of my main decks. And when I'm attacking you with a bunch of monsters and you have Battle Fader as your only defense, like oppression just stops that and will probably get you killed. So oppression is very, very good in my opinion still. It's also, so now that there's decks like the Christia Lightsworn deck that I think is very, very valuable. I think it's one of the best decks in the format. This card single-handedly won me a whole game at my locals the other day because like his hand was absolutely cracked. I think he went Beckoning Light for double JD, Christia, and Solar Purity and Light. And I had a lot of back rows. I think I had 3 or 4. And yeah, it literally that was the only one I needed to flip that turn. That was the only one I needed to actually flip that turn to stop him from absolutely ODing on me. And so, yeah, it's kind of absurd that card could completely shut down someone's entire hand. And yeah, sure, people at this point are now main decking Dust Tornadoes and stuff like that, but they're doing that for a reason, right? Like a lot of people who are main decking Dust Tornado, they're doing it because of cards like Oppression that can absolutely end your turn and probably end the game for you. It's not just like, I want to stop D-Prison or Mirror Force. It's like, yeah, Oppression is one of the reasons why this is even, like Dust Tornado being in the main deck is even valuable. So it's just annoying to play against this card. It's really problematic because when it is flipped, it's like, God damn it, that might have been my only play, and it just invalidates certain decks. Like Zombies really suffer from this. Diva Hero, I think Diva Hero really gets destroyed by Royal Oppression, and there's a couple other ones, but like I said, even the modern frog decks are more susceptible to it than ever. Also, they swap frog. Like sometimes you have a play that you need to special summon swap frog, and what normally would be a dead oppression if you're just going Treeborn Monarch is now actually a really good card against you. It might end your turn or put you in a really bad spot. So yeah, Royal Oppression's on my list of most problematic cards at number 9. All right, moving right along. So these two are a package deal. Number 8 is Honest and Kalute. And I just feel like it's a bit silly to include one over the other. Like I don't really want to have the debate too much about which one is actually better, right? Like Honest is at 2, Kalute is at 3. But I could actually, you know what, fuck it. I'll actually just say what I think about where they rank at against each other. So there's pros and cons to both. Kalute is absurd in the sense that, one, there's 3 copies of it, so it's obviously more likely that it's going to be seen. It's also searchable by one of the deck's best cards. And spoiler alert, The card that searches Kalute is in this video at the top of this video, so you will get to it eventually. But yeah, that card is actually just not okay. And so Kalute is very searchable. And it's also at 3. So it has more accessibility than Honest would. Like theoretically, sure, you could Shining Angel crash into a guy and then get an Honest and bounce to your hand, but that is not as easy as just going Black Whirlwind, summon a guy, search out Kalute, and then attack over your guy in main phase. Like attack over your guy in the battle phase and then go to main phase 2 and do other stuff. Like the Honest play I just said with Shining Angel, you have to use your battle phase to get it, whereas this one you can get it main phase 1 before you even enter battle, which is absurd. It's a dark monster. That's a big deal for Kalute. And yeah, that kind of is the reason why Kalute is on this list as well. Also, a really big part about it is you can use Kalute when you aren't battling a monster. And that is actually huge. Some games come down to literally, what are you at? You're at 42. Okay, attack and then attack with this guy, I'll Kalute for game. And like sometimes you don't even see it coming all the time. It might make you use a trap card on a monster that you normally wouldn't use a trap card on because the fear of Kalute being in your opponent's hand is game. There are times when like my opponents will be at 3,000, right? And I'll summon Bora. Like fucking Bora, literally the worst Blackwing in the deck, right? He's like 100% inferior. We don't need to have that conversation. He's inferior to all the other Blackwings in your deck. But I'll summon Bora and simply attack and they'll mirror force it at 3,000 life points because if I have even one card in my hand, it could just be game. Like I normally don't want to mirror force a Bora, but you might just have to because if I have Kalute, he just becomes 3,100 in a damage step where nothing else can be activated anyway, and you get destroyed. So Kalute's ridiculous. And then Honest is also ridiculous because Honest basically says, like, if you're intelligent, you will essentially always win the battle. If you damage calc priority, I'm using Honest, and there's really not much your opponent can do about it. Like, chaining an Honest to that is not correct because then your Honest that you chained to theirs will go first in the chain, which will cause you to gain the attack power first, and then theirs will gain all the attack power that you gain, thus making the person who dropped Honest first the winner in that battle. So that's how that works. So on turn player, like Honest will always win. And then when you're attacking someone's monster, and this is where Honest is ridiculous. When you are attacking a light monster and you really need to clear it, and let's say you've already taken damage. This happens a lot. Let's say Lila attacked you for 17, and you retaliate. You go summon Stratos, search a guy, attack Lila, and they go Honest. You just now took 3,400, which is almost half of your life. And you also no longer have a field presence. So she's about to get in for another 17, which would be 51. And this is really because of the Honest. Like Lila by herself is not anything crazy, but with Honest, she becomes essentially, she could end up doing anywhere from 3,400 to 5,100, depending on how the game went. And that is not okay. Like that is super problematic. It's really obnoxious because it's also a hand trap. Both of these are hand traps. You can't actually know if your opponent has it. You can only assume. Like there are plenty of times where you play people and they summon a light monster just to mill or just to be like, I'm bluffing the Honest, and you have to either respect it or not. But like not respecting it or respecting it, it doesn't matter. Like if you respect it, you're like, I'm not going to attack, I'm just going to wait. Like it doesn't change the fact that they still have that Honest. At some point you're going to have to deal with it. And these cards are also really annoying in the sense that games get to a point where you can no longer win because your opponent has them. Like he has Kalute and I know it, or he has Honest and I know it. So I can never put my monsters in attack mode anymore. And that is obnoxious. Like that is just an obnoxious feeling to play when you're down against Lightsworn or Fairies or something, and your life points are like, I don't know, you're at under 2,000. Anything that they put in attack mode at that point could damn near kill you. Like a Dialk can kill you with an Honest in hand, and that doesn't feel good. So yeah, these cards are pretty problematic. Can't really see them coming, but you just have to hope. A lot of times it's like, oh, I'm attacking. I just have to fucking hope he doesn't have Honest or Kalute. And yeah, they're ridiculous. Next we have Dark Arm Dragon. At number 7, I feel like this guy in Edison format is, I don't know if he's considered, I don't think anyone underrates him. I think he's actually considered the best boss monster in the entire format. In fact, I do plan to follow up this video at some point with a best boss monsters in Edison format, another video I really want to do. But Dark Arm's number 1. So spoiler alert for that video, whenever it comes out, Dark Arm is the number 1 best boss monster in Edison format. I think like 99% of people would agree with that. I don't really think there's an argument to be made for any of the other boss monsters, especially if you consider the reasons why I consider him to be also problematic. Okay, so remember what I said earlier when I was talking about Cold Wave? Dark Arm's at 1. And being at 1 means that you can't build your deck. Like when you're building your deck to fight against the meta, you can't say, oh, I'm putting this in for Dark Arm, right? Because that's ridiculous. He's at 1. So that means that he comes out rare, like every once in a while, you'll get Dark Armed. And it's obnoxious because he's such a ridiculously power card. Like he is insanely powerful. Most of the time when Dark Arm is summoned, it's game that turn, or it'll put you in such a negative card advantage position that you can't win the game, you can't come back. And that also is just problematic because every time your opponent gets to 2 darks, you're frantic about killing their dark monster on the board or giving them an additional one. And sometimes your opponent is blatantly playing to Dark Arm and there's not anything you can do about it. I played against a guy who literally could have outed my field basically, and he chose not to because it would have gave him 4th dark, essentially. He would have had to synchro, and he had a Gale on the field, so he waited for me to kill the Gale. It was like this whole thing, and I hated it because I was like, this guy has Dark Arm blatantly. He also, I'm pretty sure he had like Kalute or something, so he could have outed what I had going on, but he just chose to not do that, which makes sense, right? He played to Dark Arm, and there wasn't anything I could do about it. Like I had Deep Prison, I think I had Starlight Road set. And those kind of cards are actually pretty good cards in Edison. Like they're fine cards to play. But when Dark Arm comes down, a lot of times you just don't have answers for it. And he ends up wiping your entire field or killing you that actual turn. You don't even get another turn. It's really obnoxious. He's 2,800, a special summon. He's dark. And that can't be overstated enough. Being dark is the best thing you can be, honestly, outside of, well, technically, but also now that Consecrated Light is like in every side, I guess kind of awkward, but that's only really for Black Wings and like Sky Scourge and Alaris decks, I feel like. But anyways, Dark Arm, him being dark is really crazy because dark monsters are the best monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! And they always have been. Like dark has always been the most supported type by Konami. They love dark, so a lot of the most broken cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are just dark monsters. So the reason why I'm saying that, because JD is not on this list. So spoiler, JD is not on my most problematic cards in Edison format. And the reason why is because in order to play JD, you have to play Lightsworn monsters. And outside of like Raiko and Lila, Lightsworn monsters kind of suck. Like they're just not very good, right? So Lightsworn monsters aren't that good inherently, but Judgment Dragon is the balancing act in that deck that he just puts it over the top when you see him, when you summon him, when you resolve him. Dark Arm Dragon lets you play all the best dark monsters like Caius and Shora and Kalute and Blizzard, which is literally a normal summon Brionac or Goyo Guardian or Catastrophe or Android or whatever, right? So you get to play like Gores and Tragodia, Chaos Sorcerer, all of these insane dark monsters, and all the things in your extra deck that are dark, like Dark End Dragon, Colossal Fighter, Catastor. So you're playing some of the best cards in the format already to fuel this guy's summoning condition. And that's what makes him really, really problematic and unfair. On top of the fact that he's at 1, so you can't really predict, like, oh, this game I'm going to get Dark Armed, so let me play in a way where I can minimize the casualties by Dark Arm. Like, you can't really play a game and say, I'm going to play this entire game hoping, like, oh, if Dark Arm comes down, I'll have an out to it, because it just doesn't work out like that a lot of the time. The card is ridiculous. So he wins games on his own.
All right, moving right along, we have Substitoad at number 6. This one is pretty obvious. I think everyone knows that this card is a problem. It was always a problem. It also ended up creating a FTK format, and that's not pleasant. It happened right after Edison. It gets Ronin Totem comes out, and I think that's all it took. It just took Ronin Totem, and the combination of Substitoad just being a card already and all the different frogs that you can go through created an FTK. But we're here to talk about Edison format, and it's still problematic in this format because it does a lot of the same shit. You can still tribute and go through 10 plus frogs or Substitoads in one turn, and it thins your deck out by a lot, so you end up losing a lot of the bulk. Also, the really good frog players actually don't even thin their entire deck out of all of their frogs because they want the advantage of having Substitoad as an engine. Just think of it like a car engine. It sits on the field with a dupe frog, so that's a lock right there. It's like a soft lock, so you can only attack dupe frog, but Substitoad has another effect where he says frogs can't be destroyed by battle, so you can only attack a monster that can't die in battle. So right there, that's already annoying because without Red Dragon Archfiend or DD War Lady, there aren't many ways to like break through that. And then after that, on the following turn, when Treeborn Frog comes back, they can then Treeborn Frog to get another frog, like another dupe frog. So now you can't attack at all. And this can just become an insanely annoying lock. And after a while, then it becomes swap frogs on the field. So now every time they summon a monarch, they can bounce that monarch, and that's a little engine that they have going. So Substitoad empowers nonsense. It's not once per turn. This is before Yu-Gi-Oh cards had once per turn written on them often. A lot of cards in this format just don't have that clause at all. And spoiler alert, but yeah, there's another card on this one that's actually right after this one that's not once per turn, and it's just not okay. I don't think it would be okay even if it was once per turn, but like things need to be once per turn sometimes, and Substitoad is a prime example of why that line of text is very necessary. Being able to special summon literally 10 plus monsters in a turn, and then have an additional effect that's actually super relevant. You can get this guy for 1/1. He's at 3. Him being at 3 means that you can account for your opponent at some point dupe blocking you during the game, but sometimes your hand can't deal with it. And that's the other thing. I think it's so interesting because the dupe block is a very well known about thing, but sometimes I'll play on DB with frogs and you'll just play against people who they do not have an out to it, a reasonable out to it that they play many copies of, right? And so it will just last too long, and that's a win condition in itself. Like if your deck can't break a dupe block kind of quickly, you will lose the game to any competent frog player because of the sheer amount of advantage they'll gain from you never being able to use your battle phase. Like for somebody to remove your battle phase for like 6 or 7 turns, that's huge. Because it's not like I'm not attacking you with the dupe block. You just can't attack me back. I have a constant threatening roar in the field, and you have to deal with it. And then sometimes when you do deal with it, they get all this card advantage back if you don't make them miss timing. So yeah, this card is really, really obnoxious. But I will say, I've been playing frogs a lot lately, and I am in love with this deck. Like it feels so good to play. So that's, even though I acknowledge like, yeah, Substitoad is a problematic card. It's really, really unfair of a card, but I still absolutely love it. And I'm glad that Rotatoad is not out because then it would just be completely ban worthy. But yeah, let's move on. Okay, as I said, another guy that's not once per turn. So I actually went out of my way. Oh, actually, this copy of the card still says this is the errata version. And the errata version does actually say you can only use this effect of Brionac once per turn, but the version that's available in actual Edison format does not say that. In fact, I won't even bother. I was going to say, I'm going to go grab another version of the card that actually has the original effect. But the original Brionac, you can discard any number of cards. And you can do that as many times as you want. So it's not once per turn, which is really, really broken because you can do it one at a time. So like if I summon Brio and I go, I just want to bounce that back row, and then you don't respond, I can just bounce the rest of your field after that once I verify that your back row is not something like, I don't know, Fiendish Chain or something. I don't know what would really stop it in this format because there aren't many cards that negate effects. But like, also, if I wanted to, I could, if I knew you have like Bottomless or something, I could just pitch like 4 cards out of my hand, like discard 4 fairies, right? Like discard 4 fairies all at once. You Bottomless, I don't care. Here's Christie to deal with now. He's ridiculous. And the real reason why I think he's problematic is because it almost seems like Brionac is out of place in Edison format. Nothing else is quite like it. The closest thing is Dark End Dragon, which is very specific. This is a generic level 6. Level 6s are super easy to summon in Edison format. In fact, a lot of cards summon, not a lot, but like, actually, I will kind of say a lot, because Junk Synchron and Blizzard both summon Brionac as their normal summon. Like your normal summon is literally up there's Brionac. So yeah, Brionac's pretty easy to get out, especially when you consider like Plague Spreader Zombie turns any level 4 monster into a Brionac. So it's very easy to get this guy out. And what he does is he puts your opponent in a state where if you don't, sometimes you don't kill them that turn with Brionac, but it makes it where they can't defend themselves on the following turn because like, oh, they have Mirror Force, but I'm just going to bounce it to their hand every turn. Or they just have a handful of, this is the worst one is when you have a handful of monsters, right? You have a handful of monsters and none of them can deal with Brionac. And so you're forced to like set Raikou or set Hamster or set Spy or Sangin or whatever, Goblin Zombie, whatever you're setting. And your opponent can just every turn go bounce your monster, attack you. Doesn't feel good. Pretty much everyone who's ever played Edison format, at some point you've lost to just someone having Brionac on the field and being able to bounce your all monster hand or your one monster constantly to your hand and attack you directly with it. On top of all of what I just said, in one of the other S tier decks in the format, Zombies, this guy leads to OTKs. Like I literally have such anxiety about leaving a goblin zombie on the field ever. Like it creeps me out looking at a goblin zombie on the field when my opponent draws for turn, because so many things can go wrong. Like, you would hope that it's just Caius, but if it's Diva or Plague Spreader that gets summoned when they have goblin zombie, Brionac is coming out, is searching Mizuki, and they're going to do a whole combo where they discard Mizuki, bounce your card, then banish Mizuki, summon Goblin Zombie back, then synchro again for Goyo. That's already 5,100 damage. Then if they have the Malicious and stuff, they can discard Plague Spread off the second search, and then Malicious, and then they end up going banish Malicious, summon Malicious, use Plague's effect, make Colossal Fighter. Colossal Fighter will be 2,900 because of Malicious in the graveyard, and 23 plus 28 plus 29 is exactly 8,000. So the zombie deck has a very basic OTK in that. They can also OTK you very easily with Dark Arm Dragon. This guy, Brionac, also enables Dark Arm Dragon very easily. I already brought up the Christie example where theoretically, if you have Herald of Orange Light in your hand, right, and you have a Shining Angel in the field or something, you could just summon, synchro, and that's 2 fairies in the grave right there. And it makes Brio then discard an additional fairy or 2 to fuel Christia, and then Christia comes out, and that causes an entire problem in itself. So Brionac Christia is like crazy. Brionac to clear the way for JD or Dark Armed or anything else, or just to kill you in that turn because your life points are at like 4,000, and they're like, oh, well, I can just Brio you here. And a lot of games actually do come down to just that. Like, a lot of games come down to, oh, I can just summon Brionac. You're at 4,000 or less. And yeah, Brionac is very, very good. All right, moving into the top 4. So we have Black Whirlwind at number 4. This card creates non-games. It's in the best deck. Black Wings, I do consider Black Wings to be the best deck, because if nothing else, if we can't agree on like, oh, it might not have the most powerful cards ever, even though that's debatable too, we can all agree that Black Wings is definitely the most consistent. And in Edison format, where every deck is basically inconsistent, being the most consistent amongst all those decks is actually a huge boon in Black Wings' favor. This card puts them over the edge. This turns the deck into the most ridiculous gadget deck you will ever see. Like, they become gadgets that have real effects built into them already. Like, Shura being a Stratos that randomly also summons a guy from your deck to deal additional damage and also synchro potential and also field presence is absurd. Black Whirlwind Summon Shura Search Kalute is one of the most basic plays, and it deals with any monster in the format. Literally, every monster in the format is beaten by a Shura with a Kalute, because nothing is really 3,200 or more in the format, and that's what his attack becomes. So stuff like that. Also, the chain blocking that you can do with this card when you have Blizzard plus Whirlwind, you can make it where your opponent can't Royal Oppression you. You can make it where your Royal Oppression can't stop you either. Chainlink 1 Blizzard, Chainlink 2 Whirlwind, Oppression can't be activated now. It's very good. Same thing with Herald of Orange Light. Chainlink 1 Blizzard, Chainlink 2 Whirlwind. Your opponent can't Herald of Orange Light you. It's very, very powerful. And yeah, it's really frustrating because the Blackwing mirror match is awful. Like, it's actually just not good, especially at a high level. There are too many swingy cards in a Blackwing mirror match. Like, Sirocco is very swingy. Black Whirlwind, if someone draws it and the other person just doesn't see it, it's really, really annoying. Traps are very good in a Blackwing mirror match, but like sometimes one person might not see enough of them. The other person might see just enough, which is like, oh, I saw a bottomless and then an Icarus attack, and you weren't able to summon for like 2 turns, and now your life points are shit tier, and anything will kill you. Remember how I talked about Kalute and Honest being ridiculous because they put you in a position where your life points are so low that even if you're winning in card advantage, it's like, well, yeah, but if I get touched by anything at this point, I'm going to lose. And Black Whirlwind, just from turn 1, sometimes even in the middle of the game, it just creates such a swing and card advantage. It also kind of puts you in a frenzy where you feel like you have to make your whole game plan destroying the Black Whirlwind or getting it off the field. Like, your whole game plan has to revolve around that card can't stick around, because them getting a perpetual +1 is absurd in a deck that's already good. Like, I win so many games without ever drawing Whirlwind, as everyone does who plays Black Wings. But like when I draw Whirlwind, it seems like it just feels so unfair. Like there's nothing that my opponents can really do to get in the game, especially if it doesn't leave. Like sometimes it's fine. If you go first, it's already absurd because you get a +1 for just going first. But if it stays around to my next turn as well, that's insane. Also going second, it also makes it where now it's almost like I went first. Like if you didn't stop my summon and I'm going second and my summon is like Whirlwind Bora or Whirlwind Sirocco, God forbid, it gets out of hand really quickly. And yeah, this card just creates some really not competitive games. So for that reason alone, it definitely shouldn't be at 2. That's crazy. The fact that it's at 2 is wild. Like the fact that it's at 2 is insane. If it was at 1 though, I would still consider it annoying and problematic because then it just means you would feel so sacked when your opponent opens up Whirlwind. Like I can't really say someone sacked me when they opened up Whirlwind in any individual game. Obviously, if you open it up all 3 games or whatever, that's obnoxious. And that is kind of like, what the fuck? But if you open Whirlwind while it's at 2, it's like, yeah, I guess, I mean, that can just happen. Like there is a decent chance that a person will have Whirlwind in their opening hand or see it at some point during the game because it's at 2. If it's at 1, it just becomes a super ignorant, sacky card that you really can't account for. You just have to hope to God that your opponent never sees it, like Dark Arm and Cold Wave on this list. And that is just not okay. All right. So now we're moving into the top 3. And honestly, I feel like the top 3, you can honestly move them all around any way you want. I don't think it matters what position you put them in. Like I do have 1, 2, and 3. I have them ranked and everything. But I feel like you could literally make any of them, 3, 2, or 1, however you want to do it. And it won't matter too much. Okay. So number 3 is going to be Future Fusion. This card's absurd. It doesn't even need me to tell you why it's absurd, but in case people somehow don't know, I'm here to educate you. In Edison format, it goes by a old text, old ruling, is pre-errata, and it immediately on activation, or not on activation, but when you actually resolve it, when you first activate it, it sends all of the cards to the graveyard immediately. Now, I know the errata version says something about, like, after the first standby phase, that this card is activated, you then send the monsters. Then on the second standby phase, it summons. But in Edison format, you activate Future Fusion. If your opponent doesn't immediately do something to it, it will send whatever the materials are listed on that fusion monster to the graveyard. So this is absurd in every deck. It does scale depending on what deck it is. For example, it's absurd in Diva Hero and the zombie decks and stuff like that, right? Because you reveal Absolute Zero, and then you can send things like Malicious and Treeborn Frog, and that's just insane. Like that is absolutely insane because at that point, Future Fusion replaced itself with just the card advantage you got from sending those 2 guys. On top of that, it's threatening an Absolute Zero, which is one of the best boss monsters in the format, and as little as 2 turns. And in Edison format, you basically always get 2 turns. So if Future Fusion isn't dealt with, you will get to see your Absolute Zero. Like you don't really die in Edison format in 2 turns. So that's annoying. But then it scales crazy when you talk about a deck like Dragons, which has the best Future Fusion in the game. And it does make this card essentially an auto win. Like this card in the Dragon deck is basically game by itself. It leads to so much outrageous card advantage that your opponent has to deal with. And by the time they do, if they do, they're just out of cards and you'll overwhelm them with Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragons. So it can send White Stones, Red Eyes Wyverns, Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragons, Prime Material, Drago, all that stuff. 5-hitter Dragon sends 5. Thinning your deck out by 5 cards when this resolves is not okay. And if you sent White Stones, it could be as many as 8 cards. So you send 5 cards. And then if you sent 3 White Stones, then you literally search 3 Blue Eyes. And so your deck just got thinner by 8 cards off of 1 card. And it's kind of like why Substitoad is problematic, that shouldn't be a thing, obviously. The card is just absolutely insane. And then this one threatens you, when you do 5-hitter Dragon, it threatens you with a 5,000 attack monster, which is also just like, why are we doing this? Like, why is this a acceptable thing? So yeah, there's nothing okay about Future Fusion. It's really problematic. It's one of the cards that you don't want to see when your opponent starts the game. You don't want to see them open with Future Fusion. Like, it doesn't feel good. It just makes you annoyed, like, oh god, here we go. And you know that the game could just fall, like, it could just go completely wrong based off of just this one card. So yeah, that's why this is in the top 3. Okay, number 2, Trap Dustshoot. A lot of people will have this as number 1. Like I said, I don't really care about the placement of my top 3. They're all very ignorant, and I don't want to see any of them. But Trap Dustshoot is really obnoxious. It only has like one real downside, and that's if your opponent obviously doesn't have enough cards in their hand for you to activate it. But the problem with it is it's so high variance, right? Because if your opponent has it going first and they get to see your full 6 cards, that information alone will probably win them the game, on top of it actually taking a card out of your hand, which that part can also ruin your hand. It doesn't feel good playing against someone who knows every single card you have. You feel violated. You feel naked. Like someone seeing that you have Bottomless, Mirror Force, and Treeborn Frog as your only monster because they just sent back your Stratos, and then you have like Miracle Fusion and something else, and you're looking at your hand that is now completely dead, and you could set Treeborn Frog, but now you got this weird feeling that your opponent has Kaias because you feel so violated, and then they're low-key like smirking at you because they know like I seen what you got, like I know what you got back there, you're not hiding anything. It's just not a good feeling, and it creates a lot of non-games. A lot of games are just, I opened Dustshoot and there was nothing you could do. It was a flat-out auto win because I simply flipped this card before you did anything, and now you lose the game because I'm a competent player and I'm going to send back your best card and then play around the other 5 really, really well. And yeah, it's just an unfair advantage. It's absolutely absurd. It's also at 1, and I just hate one-offs that are this powerful, like Dark Arm, Cold Wave, Future Fusion, and Trap Dustshoot. They're absolutely not okay. They're at 1. You can't deck build around them. You can't account for it happening to you. It just kind of, some games you're just going to get Dustshoot, and that might just be your tournament. Like, I got Dustshoot game 3. He went first, and we didn't really play. He just absolutely destroyed me, and that was the end of it. So, yeah, Dustshoot's really, really not fun to play against. All right, number 1, Brain Control. I feel like if you don't have Brain Control in your top 3 most problematic cards in the format, you just haven't played enough Edison. A lot of games literally come down to nothing else besides Brain Control. What I mean by that is, this card is so absurd because there's no board that you can really make that doesn't get broken by Brain Control outside of maybe Titania with tokens or a Lonely Thought Ruler Archfiend. Lonely Thought Ruler Archfiend isn't something that really happens often. I rarely ever see that guy by himself. I rarely see that guy to begin with, let's be clear. But to see him by himself is also like, okay. But outside of those specific 2 things, every other field that you could make reasonably, like if you actually play Edison, so don't just like say, oh, my opponent has White Knight Dragon on the field and nothing else. Like, well, how the hell did they end up with a White Knight Dragon and nothing else? That's not a real field, right? White Knight Dragon is usually going to be accompanied by something like a Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon. And Brain Control, what it does is it'll take, and then you add any other card with it, like a Caius or a Substitoad, a Miracle Fusion, a Tuner, right? Like any tribute monster, really. It doesn't need to be Caius. It could be literally like Brain Control, Sirocco can be ridiculous. It breaks every single board. And the thing that I hate about it the most, especially as someone, like I consider myself to be a really good player, and I absolutely hate when games they come down to just Brain Control. Like I'm winning, but my life points are kind of low. Like I might be absolutely in a dominant position, but you know, if my opponent has Brain Control, I actually lose, right? Like I might have literally +2 on my opponent and they have enough life points to pay for Brain Control, and I might be at like 1200 or something, or maybe I'm at 3000 and they just go summon a guy, Brain Control, attack for game. Like that, just that simple. It just feels bad, and it's such a swingy card. Like it completely swings games by itself. Like nothing else, just Brain Control will put your opponent in such a bad position. And if you know how to play it correctly, it's supposed to honestly be game ending. Like Brain Control is just ridiculous. If you don't squander your Brain Control away, it is absolutely ridiculous. The fact that the monster can attack first, I also feel like Brain Control is always a +1, right? Like isn't it basically always a +1? If you play it right, you Brain Control their bigger monster, you attack over their smaller monster, and then you do something with the monster you took. So they don't end up getting it back ever. Like unless you're, I don't know, you must be down bad to Brain Control a monster and then give it back. I've never given back a monster. But if you Brain Control somebody, you attack over their other guy, so you're already like, you're basically plus right there, but then you don't give their monster back. So if you go Caius, they've lost both of their monsters and whatever you Caiused, and you just lost brain control, and your Caius is still there. So you only lost brain control. Your Caius just went from your hand to the field, but it's still there. So you just lost brain control, but they lost the monster you attacked, the monster you stole, and whatever Caius took. That is 3 cards gone. On top of that, the fact that you can brain control someone's monster and attack them, and then they could respond with something like Deep Prison or Book of Moon or Mirror Force or any kind of thing to kill their own monster, that's an automatic +1 as well. And that happens a lot. Like a lot of times you'll take somebody's shit, and when you attack with it, they have to deal with their own monster. So they lose their monster and whatever trap or whatever they use to get rid of it. And that's obnoxious. Like it's just so free to go +1. And essentially, every time I've ever played Brain Control, it has always been at the very least a +1, right? Like it's always going to be at least a +1 in my play style, I guess. But the card is ridiculous. I don't think it really requires much effort, and that's another reason why it's so problematic, is that I don't think that I am some kind of genius, because brain control is always absurd for me. It's like every time I see brain control played by virtually anyone, it's absurd, and yeah, I'm just not a fan. In my friend group, we talk about this often. So many games between really, really skilled players come down to brain control. Like, it is by far the card that has won the most games between 2 really good people. It's like, oh fuck, you have brain control, right? And that's just like, you can't really leave a Brionac on the field, but sometimes you just have to, because the game state might call for, like, this is my win condition. If I have Brionac out, I might be able to just like seal the deal, but then your opponent might have brain control, and that just absolutely ruins you. Yeah, it's also ridiculous on cards like JD and Dark Armed, obviously, right? Like taking someone's boss monster is just OD. It's absolutely insane. Brain control, take someone's Stardust, and then you could like heavy storm them, and even if they for some reason have like, I don't know, Starlight Road or something, you can negate it, or you can just push. You took that 2500 monster, right? You took their Stardust Dragon, and now you're able to summon your field with basic impunity. Like that your opponent can play Torrential or Bottomless, but you can just negate it, and sure, they'll get their Stardust back, but they might not live. Like there might not be another turn anyway. So yeah, the amount of damage this card does, it's a bit ridiculous, and the amount of swing and advantage is also ridiculous. And because Caius is the most popular card in the entire format, like Caius is the most popular card in Edison, right? So with that being known, when Brain Control gets played, it's very often that Caius accompanies it. And those two, again, just take away 3 of your opponent's cards if you play it right. It's really, really dumb. Also, playing around Brain Control is like a meme. There are just sometimes when you can't. Like, obviously, you know, if you can play around it, sure, go for it. But like, there are so many game states where you absolutely you cannot play around Brain. Like, what are you're not going to put Monsters face up? Are you just not going to put Monsters face up? Are you, like, what are you going to do? The best you can do is like not commit too much to the field. But even that is weird to do, because not committing to the field when you blatantly have, like, let's say traps or something, or another monster, like you have a Raikou in your hand and a Caius on the field, and you're like, I don't want to get Brain Control Caius. But then at the same time, this Raikou is just kind of chilling in my hand. And if I get to use my Raikou, it will actually basically win me the game, because it'll push my advantage even further. But then you lose the Brain Control plus a thing, which sucks because, again, it's at 1. It's at 1. So without any outside knowledge, like Trap Dustshoot, you really can't be like, I am playing towards you having Brain Control or not. Like, it's just unfortunate. It's just an unfortunate card that absolutely steals games. It does way too much, and is my most hated card in the entire format. If someone said you could ban one card out of the format, and only one, it's out of Brain Control and Trap Dustshoot. But at least with Trap Dustshoot, there have been many times where I and my opponent have had Trap Dustshoot and it was dead, right? Like, that has happened often. Whereas I can't name 5 games where Brain Control has been dead because someone's under 800. Like, that just doesn't happen enough. It is not very real for your opponent to not have the life points to pay for Brain Control. That is the only way they can't play Brain Control. So, like, the conditions for it are ridiculous. It's also a spell, right? Like, you can draw it off the top. Like, Trap Dustshoot is a trap at the end of the day. Trap Dustshoot is insane going first, but then it has diminishing returns the longer the game goes. But Brain Control is like middle of the game, beginning of the game, end of the game. It's always, always, always cracked. So yeah, I hate this card a lot. I hated it in Teledat format as well, because it was exactly the same thing in Teledat. Like a lot of games in Teledad was like, fuck, he has brain control. And luckily in that format, Solemn Judgment was at 3. So a lot of times you ended up solemning brain control. In Edison format, people solemn brain control all the time because you have to. And that doesn't feel good either because now your life points are extremely low. But at least you don't get absolutely ruined by them stealing your big ass monster and killing you with it or swinging the card advantage so heavily in their favor out of nowhere. Yeah, it's obnoxious. But all right, that concludes my top 10 most problematic cards in Edison format. I will say I do have honorable mention, and that goes to card destruction. Card destruction, I have it as honorable mention because this card is extremely unfair as well. It is played even less than like Cold Wave, I would say. I barely see card destruction in any decks. The only decks that really, I think, play it nowadays are Dragon Turbo. And if you consider Sky Scourge and Alaris to be a deck still, even though I feel like even less people play that, like Dragon Turbo is actually played. Sky Scourge and Alaris isn't really a played deck, but both of them use card destruction. Some Lightsworn players use it. I think it should be a staple if you're playing pure Lightsworn because it actually is just like ridiculous what it does. Like draw 5 and pitch all these guys to the graveyard that suck. Like Lightsworn monsters suck. So card destruction makes them way better because they just become new cards and they also fuel Judgment Dragon. But yeah, card destruction is broken. And in the same way as Future Fusion, sometimes it's crazy. But there are games where you'd rather have card destruction than Future Fusion because drawing 5 or 6, depending on what, like sometimes I've seen people go, and I do this myself. If I'm playing Dragon Turbo and I have card destruction and I don't want to play it immediately because maybe my hand is set up a certain way, I can wait a turn. And then when you play card destruction on the second turn, you'll get a full new 6. And obviously with Super Rejuvenation and stuff like that, it just leads to the most ridiculous turns in the format. So it just doesn't feel good when this card actually does work. A lot of the cards are like that high variance where some games they're awful, right? Like card destruction is really bad if you're top decking or if you're in a low card advantage state, you don't have a lot of cards in your hand and it's only going to draw like 1 or 2. That doesn't really matter. But card destruction when you have a grip, when you have like 4 cards in your hand, discarding 4 and drawing 4, usually any deck that plays this is a graveyard dependent deck, right? So they're going to get some kind of advantage off of putting things in the graveyard. So you have to account for all of the cards that went to the grave on top of all the cards they drew. And it just leads to like degenerate strategies and games. It's just not a fun card. It's very not fun to play against. So it's an honorable mention for me. I was going to include certain other things, but I don't even think it's worth it. Like there are definitely some other cards that you could argue are kind of problematic, but I just think like I said, Heavy Storm technically could be considered a problematic card because a lot of games also come down to does he have heavy or not, right? But I feel like Heavy Storm is a necessary evil so that people aren't just setting 5 with impunity like every single game. It would change deck building a lot. Heavy Storm actually has the biggest impact on deck building. But anyways, we will talk about that in another video. And I hope to catch you in the next one. If you like this video, please subscribe to our channel. We are trying to get to the next tier of subscribers. So right now I think we're at like 400 and something. It would be nice to get to 500. So yeah, if you guys want to help us and support us in doing this, putting out this kind of content, if you want to see more of this kind of content where I just theoretical, like hypothetical stuff like this, I'm down to do more of this. I actually really enjoyed doing this video. I had it on my mind for a while. But if you want to see more of this, then please let us know in the comments, topics that you're interested in, and I'm definitely willing to talk about them. Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm going to leave this one. So I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.